So, welcome to a virtual gallery tour and artist talk with Sarah Moore. Um, you probably already know that she has a show with us called Before and After, and we just launched a new website. You can go there and you can tour around through the magic of software in the space and get up pretty darn close to some of the pieces. I would tell you, however, that these pieces are really so wonderful in person. And I'll try and show a couple of videos that maybe kind of give you a close up from the side. But um, if you are in Seattle or actually in San Francisco next month, please feel free to either call us for an appointment to stop by the viewing room or visit us at the Art Market San Francisco Art Fair, where we'll have some of Sarah's work on display. So, Sarah, I would like to have you introduce where you're coming to us from this morning.
I am at my studio slash apartment in West Seattle. It's a beautiful apartment in West Seattle. It's a beautiful day out, and this is my workspace. You can sort of see, hopefully I won't lose you guys, but my husband and I share this space, which is like the first time that we've really shared a space together, and it's actually going really well, which is awesome. So yeah, I paint in here and we work together and it's really great.
So you
I love
moved,
being in Seattle. I'm really happy to be in Seattle. It's like a my eighth grade dream come true.
really, was it your eighth grade dream?
Because I Seattle was like the cool place in the 90s and everybody wanted to be here, and I feel like it's my dream is finally being fulfilled as a 44-year-old. So
Was there a
it
certain
works
grunge
out.
band that you wanted to interact with when you were?
Not in particular, but that was kind of the vibe that everybody was on back then.
I
So,
see, I see.
you know.
I'm going to ask you more questions about that in person later. So you moved from Bend and
Huh?
you had this eighth grade dream, but there was some other things that sort of precipitated that?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want me to go into that?
Yeah.
So I was contacted by the people at Meta to do a mural for them, which is the image you can see right behind Laura in the virtual gallery. That's one part of it. Um, and the installation was in Bellevue, and we came up here. Bill and I, my husband, came up here to do the installation, and the whole thing, it was like a dream come true. It was just such an amazing learning experience, and the project was so fun. So fun, and the kind of just like 2 weeks of intense working was we left to go back home and we were really sad. And then we found out that the house that we were living in was being sold, and we thought, well, maybe it's time for us to go someplace else. And we just felt like Seattle was a good fit, with Sync being here, and it's not too far from my family in Oregon. And um, it just seemed like the right the right move for us. So we moved here in April of last year. So we've been here for almost a year. And yeah, it's just been such a fun, such a fun move after having been in Bend for almost 10 years.
So this piece that I'm showing is you working at your studio in Bend, right? And so that was when you were working on paper and had primarily been working on paper for a number of years, correct? You were explaining how you would just be kind of hunched over in your studio day after day after day, and then you'd have to
Yeah.
do these crazy yoga moves to try to get
Yeah.
back in alignment. And so it felt comfortable to work in this way. I mean, uncomfortable, but comfortable because it's an
Right.
intimate environment, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you know, from a young age, that's how I always worked, right? Like at my little desk in my room, hunched over, or at the kitchen table or whatever, you know.
Uh-huh.
It's comfortable. Yeah. And it's
And
discomfort, I
so
guess.
so then when you got the opportunity for the mural to be at Meta, like what was your initial feeling?
Fear, terror, only because I just, the way I had been working for so long in my brain, I was like, how am I going to get this to that? Like it was just exciting and terrifying. And, um, you know, I, I, I was very, very excited about the opportunity. And they were really great about being like, we can help you. Don't be too scared. And then when I came up for a site visit before the installation, I felt a lot less anxiety about it because I thought, okay, this isn't going to be as daunting as I think it's going to be. So, and I'm like the kind of person that likes to be really um, organized and get everything together. And I felt like between Bill and I, we prepared pretty well for it, and we had a lot of really great help on the project too. So it was terrifying, but you know, the opportunity was amazing. So I'm very grateful for it.
Like every time I talked to you before it happened, it all I heard was sort of the terrified part.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, it happened, it worked out, you stretched, you pulled all this like new processes into your
Yeah.
process and practice. And I always think of that as like this, like, why can't we ever remember that when we're facing something, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like we need to have tattoos. Remember, this happened before, and it's going to be okay. I feel like
And you
Gabe's really
got
good
through
at that. Gabe, Gabe's Gabe's like always like channeling the universe. She's down there, Gabe Brown, and she's
it.
always like, "It's okay. It's gonna work
Yeah.
out." And I'm always like,
Yeah.
"I love you. Thank you for telling me that."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. In the moment it's hard to, it's that uncertainty that I think we all deal with, of wanting to know what the future is, but you're not going to know. Like you can try, but like I don't know. I am a worrier by nature, and I've been trying really hard in the last few years to just kind of like but it's hard. It's
and
hard.
then
It's a
and
release
then
of control.
the release of control, and then when your work is so controlled,
Yeah. Yeah. And like very planned. There's a lot of planning. So it was a great project though.
let
I
me just
Yeah, it's
show
life
this.
changing.
Let me just show here how it had
Yeah,
to
you have
wrap
to.
around the
Yeah.
wall, and you had to have a team of people help you to get it
Mhm.
done in a short period of time.
Yes. And they were great. I mean, they just helped me figure out how to scale it up, which, the size is intimidating after having worked. So um
Small.
the being so, yeah, so small and intimate. Um yeah,
Well, congratulations. I think that it's
thank
I
you.
mean, making so many changes in your life and process in
Hmm.
almost just a year's period of time. I mean,
Yeah,
that's kind of where your whole idea for before and after as a title came into being. There
yeah,
were so many things that you could delineate. This is where the change happened.
yeah,
And
yeah.
here's where it was, here's where it is now. Um, so, can you tell us a little bit about how, like, what does your typical day in the studio look like?
Um, Typical day. So I wake up. um, I usually work for a couple hours in the morning. My I have a part-time job as a web designer, so I do that for a couple hours in the morning, and then I'll usually take Ruby out, and then the afternoons. What even happens? I don't know. It's like all of a sudden the afternoons kind of sometimes just get away from me. So I try to paint in the afternoons, but really my primary work time is like 8 to midnight. At least that's how it's been recently. And I'm just in here by myself, well, with the dog,
So 8
painting
to
and what have
12 in the
you.
morning and then 8 to 12 at night.
Yeah. It's
Oh,
weird.
wow.
I don't know. I had a very similar schedule when I was in graduate school. I don't know. I just the afternoon. I think it's just there's so many distractions, and if it's a nice day, I want to be outside. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So those are usually kind of like the quietest times around here, and so that's when, ideally I'd be working in the afternoon too, and sometimes I do, but it's just the way my brain is.
Well, you're
So I've
doing
always been
such,
an early riser.
yeah, you're doing such intense stuff. So to have to
Yeah.
have that physical break just to kind of free your mind.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that leads me to some of the inspiration behind your pieces,
Yeah.
which walking.
Walking. Yeah. You know, Before the pandemic, I was doing a lot of yoga. Laura, you and I talked about this. I was doing a lot of yoga, and then I got really freaked out about going into classes. And when we moved here, it's just so hard to not want to walk everywhere. West Seattle is just such a fun place. So, um, Ruby and I'll just, and sometimes Bill comes with us too, but we'll just leave the apartment and just start walking and just walk and walk. And I've found that once I get to the point where I sort of forget what I was, where I kind of like go into the zone a little bit, then I'm like, okay, it's time to turn around. But I just love living in a place where the built environment and the natural environment um, are in harmony with each other. Where we lived in Bend, the built environment in to me, it's a lot of like residential kind of architecture. And here it's really cool to see, skyscrapers and cranes and all the shipping stuff at the shipping yard. And there's just, I don't know, all the little details. I was even looking outside this morning and noticing like the way that the sidewalks are laid out. And I like how things turn corners. And so I'm always taking pictures, drawing from pictures, thinking about, um, I don't know, that my interest in architecture has really grown a lot, I think, since coming here. And it's, from being in a more city like environment, I think. So a lot of stuff is just grabbed from whatever I see when I'm out.
And so, uh, how does that work into your process? Like you said, you take photos and make drawings.
Okay. Yeah, so I do a lot of doodling around. Let's see, I've got, I don't know if I have any exact, but you can sort of, my sketchbooks here. Oh, you know what? It's in this. So, like, we went to the public library and I'll just do these like little, and some of them make it into the work, and some of them I'll fiddle around with them in Illustrator or on the iPad, and then color them so you can kind of see. So there's this
A pool
cool
noodle.
like pull moon. That was um so there's, and who knows, maybe the pool noodle will show up in a painting, maybe not really sure. So there's a lot of kind of just um I use them almost as like a starting point. And then once the work is kind of up and together, then I kind of go back into it sometimes and fiddle around and make more connections within what's already there. But it always originates with whatever I'm looking at outside, or what doodles are hanging out in my brain at the time.
So, in your background, can you talk a little bit about that and how you were educated?
My background, oh, you meant my background. I did my undergraduate at RISD in the textile department, and I had wanted to go into painting, but the painting department was full. So I had a friend who was like, "Do textiles with me," and it was like the best thing ever. I'm so glad that I listened to her. And then I did my master's degree at Cranbrook, where I mostly did drawing, but I was in the fiber department. Um, and I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and in Houston, Texas, which is a really wild shift. And what else? What else can I say about that? What else? My background. I've always been an artist from a really young age. That was kind of
You said you grew up
my
around your father's massive rock and
my dad
mineral
had a
collection.
major, massive rock collection, and my mom, who's on here, hi mom, um, you. Um, she is a quilter, and so I always, quilting has always kind of been going on in the background. Both my sisters are way into quilts. My grandma was a quilter. So textiles kind of was always in the background, and I didn't really even think about it as something to study until that friend of mine in undergrad mentioned it. And then I thought, gosh, yeah, that's been like a constant in my life. Um, you know, So yeah, and my dad's rock collection. He was way into all sorts of rocks and minerals, and we had like a huge display case where we would, there's all sorts of stuff from all over the place that he collected. So those kind of two things were always in the back of my mind, I think, whether I'm aware of it or not.
Yeah, completely. Um, Gabe put a message in the chat. She said, "Is it planned or do you leave elements to chance?"
So everything is really carefully planned, but um, when I'm working, there are definitely times where I'll need to, I'll step back and realize that I need to change a color, or, um, there's some, I don't know how to explain it, Laura. We kind of talked about it a little bit on Thursday. Little areas where lines don't match up a certain way after it's been drawn out, or there are little areas that need a little bit of fiddling, then I'll go in and rework stuff. One of the questions, Laura, you had on that sheet that you gave me was when is it finished? And honestly, like I could go on and on. It's like never finished, right? For me, it's always like, how full can you get the whole thing without it being too crazy? So there are moments where I'll go back into the work and change things. But the basic compositional structure for the most part is figured out beforehand.
Um, Gabe also asked, "Have you ever worked in a reductive way?" And I don't know if she wants to be more specific about that.
Yeah. What do you mean? There she is.
So, have you ever worked in a way where, to me, it seems very meditative and it's a lot
Uh-huh.
about systems, and so it makes sense with the quilting being influenced inadvertently, like it's not something you necessarily sought out until you sought it out, right? And the whole rock collection thing makes a lot of sense to me about this idea of like a collection of systems a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and how
Mm-hmm.
you're working. And I don't know your process. So, uh, working reductively in a way where you might apply something in your system, in your planned
Mm-hmm.
um, pr process, and then take it away, like sand it down, rub it out, and then what's left over is kind of almost better, or I won't say better, but maybe different. So you're sort of left with the byproduct of something. Do you ever let that sort of lend itself to something else, or do you see that as like, uh-oh, no, that's a mistake. I got to get rid of it.
That's a really good question, and actually a really good idea.
I'm
I
working on something here. I'm I'm thinking about possibilities, see?
I I have worked on a couple pieces where I've had to go and sand out like the middle of it and rethink it, but there's no evidence of it, right? I mean, but that's a really interesting idea, so thank
I think
you.
contrasts, like the contrast of
Mm-hmm.
and you have to it's coming from where like how I might make my like what I'm interested in. So,
Right, right,
I
right.
always think it's dangerous because you always have to listen to where it's coming from, right? So,
Yeah.
this idea of something that is, you're talking about architecture versus landscape and the dualities that exist in that. I think
Uh-huh.
that's kind of an interesting idea, right? So, the systems that you have, which is like your personal, you're imbuing elements of your world into
Mm-hmm.
your paintings, and I that contrast of something that's soft versus hard, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really matter. I think it's such a interesting, like I'm even looking at the thing behind you where you have shapes that are very linear and then shapes that
Uh-huh.
are more suggestive of something um organic, even though
Yeah.
it's hard edged, right? So that's
Right.
always a fun play. No, just
Interesting. I li- I like
my
it.
first
I like that
first take.
idea.
I'll
Thank
mute
you.
myself again.
Thanks, Gabe.
Um, there's something in the chat, and it's the iPad that's talking, so I'm assuming it's Bill coming from the other room. Says, "Can you speak about your influence with Murakami?"
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I worked for Takashi Murakami for a year, 2007 to 2008. And that i- for me was kind of like my formal painting training. He has a style, I don't even know what you would call it, but super flat is his sort of worldview on how he makes things, and there's a whole philosophy behind it. But essentially, for me, the big takeaway from that experience was just becoming completely obsessed with flat color and using flat color to create dimension. Um, um, and using flat color to create a surface that is almost, and I'm always striving for this, the surface being completely flat. And for my work, I think the little bit of brush strokes and imperfections and all that stuff I'm I embrace that because I feel like people look at the work and they're automatically like, oh, it's a digital whatever. Um, but working for Takashi was really such an amazing experience because I really, in a lot of ways, had the opportunity to really like learn how to paint, which I hadn't. You know, I studied textiles, so we didn't do a lot of painting. So I would say that influence and also just the precision that was involved in that job, because in the job, you know, I was a studio assistant, so I was helping make his paintings for him. Um, you know, it was a wild experience. I'm not sure what else I can say about it except that it really helped me figure out how I like the kind of painter that I wanted to be, if that makes sense, and like the kind of
What
work that I wanted to
and tell us about the medium and the challenges that poses.
You mean just acrylic gouache?
Yeah.
Um, you know, it requires a lot of layering to get it completely opaque. And um, Laura, you and I have talked about this before, like the viscosity of it usually for me is like nail polish kind of. Um, but the great thing about it is that it sands really easily. So if there are, you know, if I'm up late painting and I come in and look at something in the morning and I'm like, what was I doing? Why? You know, there are areas where I like maybe wasn't as careful. It's really easy to sand it down and get it as flat as you need to. It it can get scratched really easily. Um, which is kind of a pain if you're trying to make the surface, you know, as uniform as possible. Um, but the colors for acrylic gouache are just off the charts. So, you know, I love the vibrancy and just how flat you can get it to look.
Jane has a question. What sources influence your palettes?
It's a really good question. I take a lot of pictures and I pull a lot of colors from pictures that I've taken. And sometimes I'll think I've got a palette that I really like, and then I'll start sort of playing around with it and realizing that no, that's not going to work. So I, right now, I'm kind of, show you guys, I'm kind of really married to this palette, which you know it's kind of a disaster. But this started out looking really neat. But this is the palette that I started working with over the last summer, and I've carried it through the last group of paintings that I've done. So I'll print them out on the computer and then match to the computer. Um, and you know, I never mix enough. So you know, when I have the formula, it's still um, you know, having to kind of I'm still working that out, trying to get the formulas right. But
So
I
when
can
you're
usually match pretty well.
so when you have all these photographs, right? So I'm just trying to paint a picture. So you
Mm-hmm.
have all of those digitally, and so you're going
Yep.
through and you're just kind of pulling hues with maybe like an eyedropper tool.
Yes. So
And
yes. So I'll drop them all into Illustrator, and then I'll put together. I'll like just start eyedropping stuff, and I'll put together like 20 colors maybe. And I would say out of you know, gosh, I don't know, like the hundreds of palettes I've created, this is the one that I've been kind of stuck on for a while. And I'll pull from it. You know, there are a couple pieces in the show right now that are a more limited palette, but it's from the same bigger group of colors that I picked. So yeah, it's like using the eyedropper, editing, kind of mixing, seeing what works. I have like a discard pile of stuff that I've mixed that I'm like, no, I don't like this one. So, there's a lot of trial and error.
And is that something that was, part of weaving or working with Takashi? Like, I mean, some
That's
some
from
painters.
that's sorry. That
No, no.
that's like a combo of an illustrator class that I took
Hmm.
um a while ago, and also Takashi, because we would have to, he'd give us a digital printout of the color palette and the painting, and then we would have to go and match um, in tiny little jars with acrylic.
When you said we, how many people were there?
Um, I want to say that the studio, there were maybe 15 of us who were assistants, and then he had a handful of interns that did a lot of the color mixing. We trained them to color mix, and then some of them became assistants later. And then the admin office was probably like 25 or 30 people that we didn't really interact with except during morning meeting, which was all in Japanese. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Gabe says, "Holy crap." Um,
Uh,
Beth has a question. Do you see
oh,
your painting style evolving over time? What do you envision for your craft in the next 5+ years?
oh my gosh. That's my sister asking that question. um, I don't know. I've been thinking about it a lot just with the show and having finished up this body of work and working on new stuff. I kind of am at a point where I think just following my gut on where I'm going is the best way forward. So a lot of the shapes that I use, I'm picking them up while I'm out walking or whatever, and then bringing them back and working them. And then some of them get retired after a while. So I think it's going to be interesting to see like what shapes that I'm already using that exist right now in the work are going to be here in a year, right? I have no idea. So I just kind of try to, my mom always said, go with your gut. So that's what I try to do with everything.
That's good. I'm gonna share my screen so we can kind of tour around the space a little bit.
Mhm.
And hold on, there we go. So are you seeing that?
Mhm.
Okay. So I want to kind of go to, guess it's going to be a little bit slow since there we go. Scroll around. Let's talk about the two biggest pieces first. Um, so can you talk a little bit about Motherboard 1 and Motherboard 2, which
Yeah.
are both 48 inches tall by 72 inches wide?
Um, yeah, so these are the biggest pieces that, besides the mural that I've ever made. And uh, you guys probably know this. A motherboard is like the basic component of computers. And my dad worked in electronics manufacturing for like his whole career, pretty much. So I always heard boards and motherboards and boards. He was always talking about stuff like that. And in a lot of ways, they're sort of organized. They're organized very, obviously, very methodically. And I don't know a ton about all the components, but I felt like this particular, these two particular pieces had a sort of layout that was kind of vast, like a motherboard. And at one point, Bill said, well, they've got such like warm, comforting, there's something really comforting about the color. And so I thought, well, I think about my mom. My mom, I know you're watching. And I get a very warm feeling from that. So I felt like it, with the titles of things, they kind of just like, I don't know what they're going to be. I don't know what they're going to be. I don't know what they're going to be. And then all of a sudden it's like, and everything kind of comes together. And so with this one, or these two in particular, I kind of, I was thinking a lot about just the organization of the space and all the components together and how everything fits together. And so, yeah, that's kind of where that came from.
A little slow with the Zoom attached to the conversation. Let's see. I love these little guys. Let's see. Let's go here. So this one is called Drunkard's Path, and it's obviously referring to the quilt pattern. Do you want to talk
Yes.
about that one at all?
Yeah, so the Drunkard's Path is a really famous quilt pattern where it's like a bunch of curves that kind of all go together to mimic, the drunk guy coming home or whatever. And in a lot of ways, this particular piece, in some ways, I think is kind of, it's got this like, I keep saying the word bubbly, it's like bubbling kind of. And so I felt very much like this was the embodiment of the drunkard's path. Like, it's sort of celebratory in a way, which is maybe, the positive side of that.
Sorry, my
No,
driving is not very good here.
no, it's all good.
And so for these, um, with that element of the quilting, like how many
Hmm.
elements of quilting would you say are referenced in these different pieces in before and after?
Cool. Um, I would say a lot. If you go to a piece like Red Rhapsody,
Mm-hmm.
um, that was one of the first pieces where I really was thinking a lot about like patchwork quilting and kind of how you create that effect when you're sewing. I mean, it's a method of um, you know, you have a strip and then you add another piece and then you add another piece and then you add another piece and you're kind of building out from this center thing. And so that's kind of where this piece originated was I love patchwork quilting. I think there's something really incredible about people taking all their weird scraps and figuring out a way to make it make sense somehow. I like the unknown component of patchwork, how you're sort of, and I had that same um, idea in mind when I was working on this piece of, what's it going to look like? And not knowing when I started what the end was going to be. And so I would say for this particular piece, the element of quilt making and patchwork and all those things is really a big part of this particular piece.
What about the title of this piece? Red Rhapsody, Lovesick.
I so the painter Jennifer Bartlett, um, who is one of my I love her work. She has this piece called Rhapsody that I have the like monograph from the show. Um, and I just loved it. I love the piece um when I get stuck, I'll pull that out and actually I don't see it on my shelf right now. Um but it's very experimental and very joyful. There's a lot of if you guys don't know that piece, go check it out. She it's really awesome. Anyway, and so I was thinking about kind of the idea of for her piece, Rhapsody, she means, you know, this like feeling of exuberance is sort of how I read it. And so I have that feeling in this particular piece. And Lovesick, I had painted this a little bit after Bill and I had gotten married. And, you know, when he and I met, I always tell people that it was like a piñata exploded. It was like love at first sight. And so in a lot of ways, I have that feeling about this piece too, that it just kind of like explodes in the most joyful way. So that's kind of where that title came from.
I
A
like
lot of
it.
times with titles, it's just like I said, you know, I'm thinking of a bunch of different stuff and it kind of just all comes together.
Let's go to this little piece of pleasure. So this one is usually hanging in your studio, and I noticed when we were together on Thursday for the first Thursday opening, you were like, "Oh, friend." So, what? Tell me about this one and why it feels so special to you.
So this is a painting. It's one of, I think it's the last piece that I created in Ben. Um, and it's the first, I think it's the first. So this one and Nowhere to Land are the two final pieces that I did in my Ben studio. And
And I'm just gonna go zoom over
they,
there real quick.
yeah. And Last of the Leftovers, that painting, you know, I used a really, really limited palette. It was made from, it was my first acrylic gouache, like real acrylic gouache painting. And I used a bunch of tubes of paint that that I'd been carrying around with me for like 10 years. And they just happened to be this color palette, which I think is very reminiscent of Central Oregon in a lot of ways. Just like the orange and the green and the purple. There's just, yeah. So I have like fond feelings toward this piece because it's was one of the final ones I did in that studio. And um, it's a color palette that I don't normally use. I even seeing it now, I'm like, oh, and it was just a really fun piece to paint. I did it over like, you know, the winter right before, gosh, I did it during the winter. I don't know here, but yeah.
So the last of the leftovers, does that refer to the paint or what
The
was in your
paint,
fridge
yeah.
before you left town?
Yeah, yeah. And
Let's
also
see.
there are quite a few shapes that I kind of am not that I'm
Using
not
anymore.
using, but have been like reworked, yeah, or discarded.
Shannon just put in a comment. She loves that piece. She, I see her staring at it lovingly when we're at the office. It's just like, oh.
Well, and
Um,
it's just so tiny. I mean, compared to
mhm,
everything else that's in the show, it's like a little baby.
yeah, 14 by 11. So
Yeah.
it's a little snuggly. It's like Ruby.
Yeah, it is. Ruby, you want to say hi?
Um, let's see here. I just want to go over to this one. So this one, I think, again, seeing these in person compared to
Yeah.
the digital images is totally a different experience because when I saw this image come through, you know, in our shared drive folder, I was like, "Oh, I like it." But then when I opened it up, I didn't even think it was the same painting in some ways. There's just a way that the
Huh.
colors interact in person are like I feel like it looks more limited here than what it
Mm-hmm.
does to your eye when you're actually in front of it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
so anyway, who cares what I think, but I would love for you to talk about this one and what kind of happened when you were working on it?
So this piece, oh man, I don't even know where to start with it. I think, okay, I'll start with the title. So the title for this one, Call Me When You Get There, is I, when I first put this piece together, um, I really, I really
Sorry.
loved how sort of, I don't know, it's very cheerful in my mind. And I think, the sentiment of like, call me when you get there is, what you say to somebody when you're saying goodbye to them and you want to make sure that they're safe. I think I wrote something about it that you posted on Instagram. And I wanted that sentiment to come through in the painting. Um, there's a sun and these kind of like North Star sort of shapes, as like a compass or a guide. And I think for me, when somebody says to me, call me when you get there, it's like a way of saying I love you to somebody. So that's kind of what I hope comes through in the painting, the sort of that feeling of, it's an exchange of love in a way.
How important is it for you to title your pieces versus, just giving them a numbered system?
Some of the older pieces have a numbered system. But with these, I think so. My mom and I were actually talking about this not that long ago, where there's like an underlying meaning to me, right? That has to do with something that maybe is not relevant to the viewer about the piece, right? And so part of the title comes from that kind of thing, like for example, and we don't have to get into it, but my dad died in September. And so a lot of what this body of work in my mind, call me when you get there is like my message to him in a way, like wherever you are, call me when you get there kind of thing, right? But to somebody else, I mean, that same sentiment is something that we all feel and understand, right? I mean, we say that to the people that we love all the time. So it's not just my personal my personal stuff that goes with it. And I feel like all my titles, at least lately, have kind of been like that, where I'm trying to find something that's universal within my own personal experience that maybe offers another window into what somebody's looking at.
How do you um, how do you want these pieces to live for a collector? Is it um, do you imagine that they are looking at them sort of as a visual meditation, or is there some sort of thing that you're imagining people would be getting from them?
Yeah, I mean, I- for me, a lot of um, looking at art is about slowing down. And I know that I can't control that for other people, but I do think that there's something about seeing one of these pieces from far away and saying, oh, it looks like a computer made it. And then you get up closer and you can see the brushstrokes and you can see maybe where I like agonized over which color to use or where to go. And my hope with these is always that they, within the sort of maximalism of them, that they offer some kind of meditative quality that hopefully helps somebody slow down the way that they help me slow down when I make them, if that makes sense.
And so the maximalistness of them, how do you um, that's almost the opposite of some of that in some ways, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is. I mean, I guess I just hope that my the feeling that I have, and I think probably all artists feel like this, the feeling that you have imbues itself into the piece, right? So for me, it's like a very meditative experience to make them, as you know, I'm sure for all artists, it's, you want to get into that flow state where you're just like in the zone and you're doing your thing and you're, full of joy and it comes through in the work. I think that's always my hope.
Very nice. Um, well, let's see. Is there anything? I mean, there are a couple more pieces. We've got Nowhere to Land, as you said, and then we've got
Hmm.
this piece, which is called The Other Side of Somewhere. And this one, this area, I love this area when you're looking at the piece in person. You get a real sort of, come on, like if I can, this works so much better when you're not doing it over Zoom. Uh, I love the plays of color in certain areas where this has that um, mitered
Like,
edge element, and there's so many of those throughout this exhibit that
yeah,
are just gorgeous. Um,
thanks.
like, so I want to just ask you a couple more questions,
Hmm.
and one of those is, what's the worst thing about being an artist?
I would say the uncertainty and the self-doubt, right? I mean, it's, you know, it's just a different kind of job from like a 9 to 5. And I love that about it, but it's also slightly terrifying because um, you don't know uh, if people are going to like your work. And if they don't like it, you still have to, like, it's not like I'm going to not do it. Right. So there's a lot of fear, a lot of like, you know, I think doing the meta mural is probably a really good sort of metaphor for being an artist, just not knowing what always what's coming next. Like I can plan, but I don't
Hmm.
always know. There's a lot of uncertainty, which that's in a lot of ways, I mean, that's a fun part too. It's a roller coaster. And if you
What do
don't like
you
roller coasters, it's not the right job for you.
um uh what do you feel about the best part of being an artist is?
The best part is that I I do what I want. You know, I I really I mean, I just love that I get to make art. I mean, it's like being an artist for me is like my childhood dream, you know, and to be able to fulfill that on some level is really satisfying. And, you know, for me, I love making things and I love painting. I mean, I can't say it any other way, but painting just brings me so much joy and fulfillment. And if I'm having a bad day and I go and paint for a few hours, like I always feel better.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Does anyone else on the call have questions? No. Everybody's very quiet right now. They've all sunk into a deep meditative state,
I hope so.
ready to go to their own studios.
Yeah.
I do. I have some
Yeah.
questions.
Okay.
So, um, this idea of uncertainty, Don't you feel there's a lot of power in that also? So I don't think I personally don't think that it's pejorative. I think it can be really
Okay.
powerful. And it's this idea of being glued to outcome, right? Like of your perception of what you think something's gonna see. I'm coming full circle now. So this idea of
Hmm.
like our perception of what we think something is supposed to be. And if we just are maybe open as artists, this is coming from another artist perspective, if we're open to those possibilities, like letting go of one thing allows for something else. Do you find that I mean, that that to me just makes so much sense in painting, but tell me what your thoughts on that are.
Well, it's really interesting that you even said that because I last night I was listening
Am I a
to
mind reader? Am I reading your mind?
you totally are. So
All
I've
right,
been reading.
I can see the
Okay,
future.
hold
I
on.
see it.
Hold on, I got to look at my my library. Oh, um, the Seth Godin's book, The Practice. I
Sorry.
just got to the I just got to the point in that book where he talks about that and that uncertainty is, you know, and being how did you say it, Gabe? Glued to an outcome
Oh yeah.
is really can hold you back. So I don't now that I'm getting all the vibes that are coming from Gabe and from Seth Godin and the book that I'm reading, and it's going in there. But yeah, I mean, I do now that you say it, I can see the power in that, and that um, you know, nothing is for certain.
And it's even though I see your work as so organized, right?
Hmm.
It's also kind of like organized chaos, and that's
Hmm.
the magical part, I think, of it too. So just,
Cool.
a little food for thought there. And
Thanks.
when
No, it's I like
moving
that.
stuff around.
We should talk more often.
I know. Can you both come to San Francisco for the art market?
Oh man, I'm thinking about it.
That would be really fun. Um, and Sarah, if you get the chance to visit Gabe in her studio in upstate New York, you'd have a wonderful time. Very wonderful. Um, so let's see. I think there was one more question. Where did it go? Oh, nope, she just had to run out the door. Um, well, I really appreciate everybody joining us this morning. I hope that you are going to have a great Sunday afternoon. Um, feel free to hit us up for video close-ups. I couldn't figure out how to actually do that without stopping the Zoom, because those will help you sort of see the surfaces of the paintings themselves. And the show runs through March 31st. After that, we've got a new exhibition with an Australian artist. Her name is Lynn Flemons. She paints landscapes, and they're quite beautiful. And we'll be at Art Market San Francisco in April, and then at Volta NYC in May. So there's lots of places we'll be. If you're in and around, please stop by and say hello. And Sarah, thank you for doing this show with us. It's great.
Yeah, thank you. I'm
Thank you.
very excited, and thank you to everybody for being here.
Have an awesome
Really
Sunday.
cool.
I will put a recording of this on our YouTube channel so everybody can see it at their leisure again.
All right.
Take
And
care.
thanks everybody. Megan, I'll see you soon.